Good evening. I'd like to call this meeting to order of the Cedar Falls Board of Education with the reminder that the action taken at this table will focus on our students and their achievement. With that, do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
It's been moved by Susie to approve. Do I have a second?
Second.
It's been seconded by Jenny. Any questions or comments?
One quick question.
Yes.
I noticed when I was going through the accounts that there are several subscriptions that come due this time of year, and it used to be, well, you'd have a magazine in your hand that reminded you that you were getting a subscription, but a lot of our software packages are now based on a subscription rather than a payment up front. I'm assuming that someone goes through there and makes sure that we're still using these particular software tools and those sorts of things.
We do. Yep, we have a process in place to make sure that those are examined, to make sure of the educational use and certainly that they are beneficial for what we're trying to accomplish.
Okay.
Thank you, Jeff. Any other questions? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Moving on now to public comment. Dr. Pat T., would you like to read a statement?
Sure. Again, thank you for everyone for being in attendance this evening. And some individuals may be new to viewing the Cedar Falls School Board meetings, and I wanted to provide some information regarding our public comment section. Our school board meetings are, by Iowa code, considered open meetings. An open meeting means the meeting is open to the public to observe and listen to the proceedings of the meeting. At the public comment section of the agenda, citizens have the opportunity to make brief statements to the board. To make a public comment, a citizen must simply notify the district office or board president by 4 p.m. the day of the board meeting. Make sure the comments are less than 3 minutes and keep the comments germane to school district business. We do have individuals signed up for public comment, and up first we have Mr. Larry Whitehoff.
Just in time.
Welcome.
Good evening.
I'm sure nothing's changed, so 4241 East Park Road, the best city, Cedar Falls, Iowa, advocate for the people of Cedar Falls. My resources tell me that later tonight you'll be talking about the remodeling of the high school at a cost of $84 million versus the new cost of $86 million. First of all, how did it increase by $24 million from the last article I found in March 2017? I've got a friend now remodeling his house, and he told me that it would be impossible to remodel for $84 million unless using gold-plated toilets, nails, and roofing materials. Basically, this $84 million is an insult to my UNI, Iowa, and Iowa State graduate people and our kids and grandkids' intelligence. We weren't born last night, people. It can't be that much money to remodel a high school. Finally, as board members, you should be ashamed of yourselves for trying to push this onto the intelligent Cedar Falls citizens. See you at the polls.
Thanks, Larry.
Thank you. Next.
I think it might be good just to kind of reiterate and reflect on it. I know sometimes we wait until we have communications, but I think this is important to at least have this information shared with our board and our community. I know our board members have gone through this process and have been here for multiple meetings to go through the iterations and discussions. And as we shared now, I think the last 2 or 3 meetings, as we've had different members of the design team here, different presentations, different group presentations, the remodeling of the high school has gone up in 5 years, as has construction of new. As we look at apples to apples comparisons, as we look at trying to say remodeling of the high school plus looking at acquisition of land to be able to come up with something that's fairly equivalent of acreage of land is actually 118% of remodeling the current high school. When you look at just remodeling the building, which would be a 10-year vision with our enrollment growth, with the current acreage and current site, it's roughly about 75% of a new construction, which shows It's money invested and not a long-term vision with a need to do something within 10 years, because that site then is at capacity and there's no more additional growth without acquisition of land. I know we know, and we've talked about here at the board table, that acquisition per acre of land around that current high school site is $1.5 million per acre. And again, the amount of land that would need to be acquired is just so overreaching and far-fetched that is something that we can't do. I know our speaker tonight talked about insulting. It's not insulting, it's maximizing dollars of investment, because we know we have to do something, and we know that the cost of doing nothing is significant, about $3.2 million per year, because inflationary costs of construction are going up. We just had a community meeting with multiple community leaders that were talking about construction costs, especially commercially, is going up about 10% per year. And that's conservative. And I know members of the board have greater insight onto some of those construction costs as well, because they are knowledgeable about that work. There are some estimates it's going up 20% per year because of the cost of materials, supplies, and just the growth that we're seeing across our community. So I think it's important to note that while some people state insult, it's really maximizing our taxpayer dollars in a way that's most effective long-term, short-term, and medium-term. We do have another public comments and speaker, Tracy Malero.
Thank you, Tracy.
Hello, thank you for letting me speak. I'm a resident of Cedar Falls, and my husband and I have lived here for 17 years, and we have 2 kids that graduated from high school and 2 kids that will be. However, we don't have a dog in the hunt here in terms of a new high school, because my kids will have already been graduated before we get here, but I sincerely think we do need a new high school for the community. And let me just tell you a story that kind of describes why I think we need a new high school. My husband, he is the CEO of VGM, and he was recruiting a new senior VP last spring. It was a couple from Florida. They had 2 high school kids, and they were excited initially about moving here. And granted, it wasn't a day like today. On paper, they liked what they saw about Cedar Falls High School. There's a lot of great things about the high school. And the next day, we met with them, and then we had a dinner, and the next day they're going to embark on their tour with the high school. And needless to say, they were underwhelmed with the high school, and that probably would not be strong enough. Their observations. First off was the parking. They had to park 3 blocks away in a residential neighborhood and zigzag their way into the front door. Not a great first impression. Then when they entered, they noticed the lighting was poor, there were no collaborative spaces, the property was in disrepair, it looked outdated and junky, they said, and there was no air conditioning. It was one of those hot spring days, and so when they were there, they noticed the humidity dripping from the walls and from the ceilings, and it was wet. And then with heat, you know, there comes smell, and it smelled in there, and it was musty. So it just left a really, really poor impression. So needless to say, after that, they were no longer interested in the position, and, you know, VGM lost that candidate. They simply could not see themselves at our high school. It was a downgrade from their high school in Florida. It's really hard for businesses to grow if they can't get qualified workers to come here. Cedar Falls is one of the premier communities in Iowa. We have that pride. When we look at our high school in Cedar Falls, ours simply doesn't measure up. So I urge you to take a tour of other communities around Iowa, like Linn-Mar, Ankeny, Waukee, Des Moines, Waverly. These are all more progressive and advanced high school facilities than ours. They're prospering, and we're competing against these communities for scholarships, jobs, and workforces. Our kids are not getting the same opportunities at their school as these kids. Why do we not want to offer better educational opportunities and a decent facility to our kids in Cedar Falls? I urge you, if we don't do it now and you're going to vote no, when will you vote yes? Our building is 70 years old. Are you going to wait till the building's 80 years old? Another 10 years, and then we're 10 years further behind than we were before? In the meantime, I think we need this school now. We've wasted time. It's time for Cedar Falls and excel and be once again a leader in this community and in Iowa, and what is best for our kids as well as for the economic development of our community. Thanks.
Thank you.
I think another opportunity just for kind of a informational component with the board, I think it's important to note when we talk with our community members, and again at a meeting that we had with some of our community leaders just last week, the conversation is with facility, it limits what we hope to do, know we need to do, and have our kids be competitive. We have excellence in education as far as what we try to provide for students, but we know there's much more we can do to help support kids. And I think sometimes the argument that we hear is, well, you're doing good enough, and you have pretty good scores, so why worry about it? And the answer truly is, our kids deserve to have every opportunity available to them to be competitive when they go out and are trying to make their way in life. We know that right now we are limited in what we can do, should do, need to do, and I think as the former speaker mentioned, we are in competition with districts across the state of Iowa, across the Midwest, across the country, but now truly internationally across the world, and I think that's important to know.
Thank you. All right. Moving on now to item D on the agenda, the Secretary's January financial report.
Okay.
Danelle.
Yep. Thank you. So for our January monthly report, our revenues for our general fund were $3.5 million. We had expenses of $4.7. You'll see a fund balance of $5.295. That was down a little bit from last year at this time. Part of that was because of a timing issue when revenues and invoices were paid and received. So we can go ahead and move on to the management fund. We had $7,000 in revenue, $4,000 in expenditures, with a fund balance of $788,000. In our capital projects, again, this is really just interest as we continue to pay out that fund. $678 in revenue. We had a few expenditures of $33,000 with a remaining of $313,000 with a balance. For our save revenues, we had $429,000. We had expenditures of $1.4. We did have that transfer out to our sinking fund, which is our debt service, with a balance of $8.3 million. And just a reminder that the $995 is restricted, so we have an actual balance of $7.3 available for use. For our PEPL, we have $34,000 in revenues, expenditures of $315,000, with a fund balance of $3.486 million. In our debt service, we had revenues of $70,000. We had the transfer in from our save of $218,000 for revenues of $2.9. Expenditures were $745,000 with a balance of $2.1. For our student activity, we had $47,000 in revenues. Expenditures were $94,000 with a total fund balance of $542,000. And for our agency and trust funds, we had $6,000 in revenues, expenditures of $15,000 with a total fund balance of $205,000. And in our enterprise fund, we had revenues of $226,000, expenditures of $204,000 with a balance of $679,000. And our coffee shop, we had $846, expenditures of $1,400 with a fund balance of $4,800 for January. And finally, our River Hills, as you know, this is a flow through, and our revenue was $546,000. Our expenditures were $793,000, and so it leaves a zero balance, which this is a timing issue dependent upon when those payments are received and expended. Is there any questions?
Questions from the board for Danelle? Hearing none, we'll put the Secretary's financial report on file for audit. Thank you. Now to communications. Marika Yang, our student representative for the high school. Welcome.
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
So at the high school, we just finished our Student Senate fundraiser for Knox Blocks, where we raised approximately $300 with Chick-fil-A sandwiches and baked goods, which was really exciting. And the school musical is wrapping up practices and will perform on March 8th and March 9th at 7 p.m. at the high school, so mark the date in your calendars. And the whole school is being encouraged to write cards of support for Will Reiner, as well as a bake sale. And winter sports are coming to a close, and spring sports are starting practice now, even though the weather is a little cold. And then Rocket Club is having their first full-scale launch this Saturday in North Branch, Minnesota. And sophomores and juniors are also registering for their classes next year.
Good.
How was the Rocket Club trip down to Alabama?
That is in April, so
Gotcha.
that'll be our full launch on the competition.
Okay.
Do you know what the musical is this year?
Yeah, it's Cinderella.
Oh, okay, yeah, you said that before. but-
Yeah, it'll be Cinderella at the high school. Awesome. Thank you.
Thank
you.
you.
Okay, Janelle.
Hello. Yeah, lots of great things have been happening across the district, so we'll go ahead and get started. The first thing we kind of want to talk about tonight will be our informational session that we'll be having this Thursday in the high school cafeteria, and we'll be presenting a lot of the information that's already been covered at board meetings, as far as some of the research and some of the work that Envision has done, but then we'll also talk about our survey results, and then also give people some opportunity for questions and feedback. And then at that point, we're going to offer some tours of the building as well. Having it in the cafeteria, I think, will be a benefit. A lot of people don't end up seeing that area of the building. So you're welcome to stay, though, because then you can see one of the updated areas at a band concert at 7:30 following the informational session. Orchard Hill has expanded into some of their new space, and if you think facilities don't make a change in how kids respond when they're in a building, you should have seen these faces the day they got into this gym. It was pretty amazing. So this is their new space, the new gym that they have there at Orchard Hill. This is their new office space. So prior to this, the secretaries were not even in the same location. This is Principal Andrea Christopher's new office. They actually have a staff lounge area where they actually can sit in. This is the nurse's office. Before they had this expansion, she was actually located in a closet at Orchard Hill, so this is a major improvement for the nursing facility, as well as the cafeteria. They actually now have a kitchen and a cafeteria at Orchard Hill. Prior to this, it was all in one location, so that's their new kitchen. This is one angle of the lunchroom space, and this kind of looks out towards Round Street there. And then again, this is just another view of the gymnasium. And if we could just go a little toggling back and forth here. New, old. So it makes a big difference when you look at these images. It's pretty amazing. So that was their old space, which was their lunchroom and their gym, as well as in an auditorium where they were able to work together. And then this is also the new space for the PE teacher, and she was probably as excited, maybe a little more excited than the kids. Most excited about this space because she's actually able to utilize all of her equipment now with the kids. Before, it was stored kind of all over the building and she wasn't able to access it easily. So this is a space she has, and that was the space that she previously had to try to utilize for all the equipment. So it's been really exciting the past couple weeks at Orchard Hill. They'll now transition into getting the 5th and 6th grade moved in at spring break, and then once those are moved in, then they'll be out of those portables. But then over the summer, they'll also be working on some of the spaces as far as where the office was and the old gym, to transition those spaces into new renovated spaces as well. So we'll definitely have a community open house when that's all completed. Believe it or not, we made it to our 100th day of school a while back. So this is just some cute photos of the fun that happened across the district. Specifically at the kindergarten level, they really enjoy celebrating that 100th day. Also wanted to quick mention, in February was our National School Counseling Week, and we have the best of the best school counselors in Cedar Falls, and they really make an amazing impact every day across the district. So this is an actual photo of all of our school counselors, elementary, junior high, and high school. We had a Cedar Valley Tools for Schools winner at North Cedar Elementary, Mrs. Chambers. She's the reading teacher there at North Cedar, and they're going to be using those dollars to purchase some books for North Cedar Elementary. And this is a big accomplishment. The Pete's Junior High 8th grade concert band, they were selected as a 2019 middle school concert band. They're going to perform at the Iowa Bandmasters Conference, and Mr. Beiersdorfer is a conductor for the 56 student ensemble. It's the second time they've appeared in this, and it's probably the highest achievement that can be given to a band in the state of Iowa. They'll perform Friday, May 10th in Des Moines. It was done by blind judging, so they had to submit their selections, and then judges chose based on that. So they were very excited, and this is all of the 8th grade band. I think a John Henry Hines maybe somewhere in that photo. And Henry, and Mr. Giddens is in there as well. So moving on to some great accomplishments with our music program, A.J. Jackson is a senior trumpet player, and he was offered a full-time position with the U.S. Marine Corps Band. He had to go through lots of rounds of trying out for this, and he was accepted, and then he'll go through the full training and then travel with the band. And they do 300 times a year, they do concerts, and he's currently a member of the marching band, Wind Symphony, and Jazz One. So a big congratulations to A.J. on that accomplishment. And also another big shout out to our music program. Both of our high school jazz bands earned first place at the UNI Tallcorn Jazz Festival. It's the first time in our history that both groups have earned first in both classes, and it was on the same day. So congratulations to both of those bands. And just wanted to mention real quick that we'll be launching a summer CAPS program this summer. It's going to be mid-June to early July, and it's going to be at local businesses, and it's going to be focused on entrepreneurial studies for students. So this is kind of a first step into a summer program, and there aren't any other CAPS programs that actually have summer, but we've definitely learned from our students. Many of them want to do the CAPS program, but if they're taking a lot of AP courses or really in a lot of the music, then they're not able to always fit it in the 3 block of time. So we're hoping this kind of creates some more opportunities for our students to still have the CAPS experience, but kind of in a shortened way and then over their summer. So there'll be more information that'll be given out to students and parents as that information comes available. And you can find all this information also on our social media. Any questions?
Any questions for Jill? Thank you, Janelle. Okay, moving on now to the approval of the summer 2019 roofing project bid. Dr. Petit.
Yes, I think we have a presentation to go along with this, and several of the slides are slides that we have seen over the course of the last several meetings, so we'll go through those pretty quickly. Just a little bit of background and statistics. We have 14 facilities. You can see kind of the breakout there. Total roof area is a little under 900,000 square feet. So we have 259 separate roof sections, and again, they vary in ages from 28 years old to new with some of our newly added spaces across our district at our elementary. Next slide, you can see that we do have a 10-year construction plan budget for roof repair and replacement. We want to make sure that we keep ahead. As everybody knows, if you don't have the right roofing and you might have damage to roofs, then that causes other significant issues. So we make sure that we have gone through, we've done an audit of all of our square footage and roofing material to make sure that we have a plan over the next 10 years. Next slide, you can kind of see how that builds out. Not necessarily important as we look out 6, 7, 8 years, but I think it's important that the board knows and our community knows that we have it delineated out as far as what will be coming up next based on those assessments. Next slide goes through 2028, which is again that 10-year plan. This is for 2019 summer. We've gone through the public hearing process, the bidding process, and this is at Pete Junior High. We had a total of 3 different roof areas that we were looking at. 2 of them were in the base bid, and you can see that those are in the larger boxes right below where it says project is free, and then down in the lower left. And then we had an alternative bid, which is the section right in the middle. Next slide. Here's just an aerial photo that shows those areas highlighted to give the board a little bit different perspective on where those are at. Next slide. As we talked about in previous meetings, there was a project detail with the roofing process and what the materials were and the different slants and slopes of the roof. We had a budget for this that we went through the process to delineate. The budget based on our 10-year plan within our physical plant and equipment levy was $283,320 for this peat construction. We had an alternate bid estimate of $30,798. We are ecstatic, and we're ecstatic, and this is a little small, but the overall project came in significantly under budget, what the estimate was. So the base bid from Service Roofing was $233,000, and again, the estimate was $283,000. And they had a $30,300 alternative level bid for the alternative roof replacements. So their total was $263,300. And just for the base bid, our estimate alone was $283,000. So we are roughly $20,000 under the estimate bid. There was a fairly significant spread within the estimates, as you can see, and a lot of that is roof work already lined up, the busyness of companies, timing, and different mobilization aspects. So we're very comfortable with recommending Service Roofing Company with the base bid and the alternative bid of $263,300, roughly $20,000 under estimated cost.
Thank you, Dr. Pattee. Do I have a motion?
I move that the Cedar Falls Community School District Board of Education approve the Pete Junior High 2019 roof improvement base bid of $233,000. In addition, alternate number 1 of $30,300 for a total bid of $263,300 from Service Roofing Company, Waterloo, Iowa.
Thank you, Susie. Do I have a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded by Jeff Orvis. Any questions or comments? Yes, Jeff.
Yeah, so do you have, this is a random statistic, and I don't expect you necessarily to have it, but do you know, so we're going to have a 30-year warranty on these sections of the roof. How much of our roofs, I know we have like 900,000 square feet total, how much of it is still under warranty? Because I imagine that plays into that replacement cycle that you've programmed there as warranty runs out.
Correct.
Maintenance costs start going up. We need to replace a roof and we can put it in another 30-year cycle.
So at different times, under different measures, I know that the standard that the district put on was a different standard than we might replace now, but some of that's due to funding at the time, some of it's due to just the product that was available at the time, and again, it's changed. So just because now we have a 30-year warranty doesn't mean that we did 30 years ago for some of the roofing replacement that was done at that time. So I don't have that statistic on number of roofs that are covered by warranty and square footage that is not. My guess is Doug would have if he was sitting here and be able to come to the nearest 100th percentage point. We can find that out, but I would imagine that we have, because we stay on top of this and we dedicate dollars to make sure we don't have issues and we don't have roofs that are well beyond their lifespans, because we budget annually for this, it's probably in that 40% range.
Well, you had to put that 10-year plan together. Somebody came and did an assessment of it all, looked at the warranties, looked at the lifetime wear and everything to come up with that plan. We did. I just don't know the answer to your question on the percentage that is under warranty and the percentage that is under warranty. Yeah. But again, the assessment was done with all the information about the warranty, the wear and tear, the snow loads, the different life cycle spans of different products that we put on. Okay.
Can I just ask, for the new construction, is the technology and design such that the lifespan of the new roofs will be longer than maybe these sort of flat?
So technology has gotten quite a bit better when it comes to some of the slope and the slant in the product. So, there are some metal seaming that we've done recently that's been pretty good for lifetime and life cycle cost, but also some of the tiered insulated rubberized surfacing that we had before. It was rock-based, now it's much stronger based, so it has a much better life cycle expense as well as warranty. So we feel confident that, yes, we have better products, but a lot of that's just technology and better enhancements.
So follow up to Sasha. So do we have a 30-year warranty on our new roofs that we've just put in?
I would have to go back and double check that.
Seems like we did, if I remember right.
That was my recollection.
Yeah.
So I would have to say yes, but I'd want to make sure I double check on that.
And the funds for this come out of the PEPAL.
It does, yes. This is part of our 10-year PEPAL plan. So within our 10-year PEPAL plan, we have a 10-year roof replacement plan that's embedded within the cost that has kind of a stationary placeholder within that budget.
Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Thank you. Now moving on to the substantial completion of the Aldrich Elementary kitchen equipment.
So there's a short little presentation with this as well, and this is just always exciting. This is always kind of 1 year in arrears after we have approved something. It gets installed and it gets all the different financial components worked out and certain construction components worked out. So this is simply saying that the substantial completion for the kitchen equipment in Aldrich, that the bid was let over a year ago, to say that this is now completed, installed, and they have met the requirements. You can see that the original contract sum was $22,700 for the equipment. This is a service equipment, so they prep all the food there as well as serve the food there. When you look at the change amounts, we had a change deduct of $1,500, so the overall expended amount is under budget of $1,500. It is part of the construction package, so it's part of the bond referendum dollars that went towards this. We are just ecstatic with the equipment, and I can say that the students are as well, just with the food service and the quality coming out of that kitchen.
Thank you. And you do have a motion to approve the completion of the Aldrich Elementary kitchen equipment.
I move that the Cedar Falls Community School District Board of Education accept as complete the Aldrich Elementary kitchen equipment project. All claims for materials furnished, labor performed, and/or services provided on this contract must be filed within the next 30 days.
Thank you, Eric. Do I have a second?
A second?
It's been moved and seconded by Sasha. Any other questions or comments?
So not trying to put you a roof expert and then a kitchen expert.
I'm trying.
Sorry about that. But, so Aldrich is a little bit unique in that we have a full kitchen, or do all the elementaries?
No. So this is unique. We have kind of kitchens that supply the other elementaries. At Orchard Hill, we've put in a kitchen there. It has kind of a partial ability to cook, but we're seeing the benefit as we look at now having this much more kind of decentralized and put into our buildings because of the ability to be able to have the food service directly there. It's worked wonderfully at Aldrich.
So is Aldrich then actually serving to other elementaries out of there?
Just serving Aldrich.
Just serving Aldrich?
Yep.
Okay.
And the high school and Pete are the ones that serve the other buildings.
Okay.
We knew that those kitchens were not adequate enough to be able to add another elementary building, so this is the reason why we built on at Aldrich to be able to expand that kitchen. And the way that it has worked has exceeded expectations with just the efficiency, the food quality, the prep that's been there, that it has certainly been exceptional in how well it's worked.
Are they able to provide more fresh food options, fresh vegetables and fruits? And
They are, and you know, when you have a couple centralized kitchens that are outdated and old, trying to then time the shipments, sometimes starting at 9:45 in the morning to go out to different buildings, it's sometimes impossible to keep some of those things fresh. So this allows us to be able to have much more kind of self-serving, some fresh different aspects, some different kind of buffet-style aspects for condiments that we aren't able to provide in other buildings.
Good. Any other questions?
Facilities make a difference, especially when it comes to kind of quality, even in just food service.
it's important.
Let's vote. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Thank you. Moving on now to the facility survey update. Janelle, do you want to introduce? Or Dr.
Sure.
Petty?
I would be happy to. So, of course, we did our survey in January. This is a summary report put together by the Donovan Group, and Jerry Gallagher with the Donovan Group is here today to present those results.
Thank you. Welcome, Jerry.
And we're excited to have Mr. Gallagher to come on board to be able to provide the survey to really ask for insights, direction, guidance, and feedback from our community. And it went out to just a wide range of constituent groups, and certainly excited to have Mr. Gallagher here this evening.
Thank you, Dr. Petit. Thank you, school board members. In recent years, the school district, as you know, and the school board have been evaluating the district's facility needs and exploring possible solutions. And as part of this process, the district and board have held more than 50 public engagement sessions since 2014. And so to help determine how the district could best meet these facility needs, the school board and administration requested that a survey be conducted, and that survey was organized by the Donovan Group, which is who I represent here. And that survey that we did received a total of 1,724 completed responses. Just to give you a sense of what we feel about that from a company standpoint, we have been doing this with the Donovan Group, this kind of a survey for over a decade in school districts, the likes of Milwaukee, Madison, Sioux Falls school districts in Iowa. And we have, this number, 1,700 completed responses, is one of the best turnouts that we have ever seen. So I think that really goes to engagement with the community on this topic. I'm not going to go through the entire report here because that would keep us here all night, but I will certainly highlight some of the key points. Regarding process, the survey was administered using the Donovan Group's survey engine. Efforts were made to ensure that all eligible respondents had the opportunity to take the survey, but that no respondents took it multiple times. To encourage residents to take the survey, the district issued a news release, posted links to the survey several times on its social media pages. The survey was open from January 7th to the 21st. And finally, this is very important to note, this data is not based on a scientific sample. Therefore, it should be treated as qualitative data that's similar to data from a large number of focus groups that you might have. Because we used a convenience sample, it would be methodologically inappropriate to carry out a regression analysis or attempt to calculate error. Our response pool to date is a solid one. We believe that it provides sound data to the board moving forward. To the survey results, again, we mentioned 1,700, more than 1,700 community members completed the survey. We have a series of questions reflecting demographic data. And you'll see as we go through this question by question, and we'll do this rather quickly unless you have questions about these specific questions, that there are two different columns. And one column on the left is the respondents, and on the right is a comparison group of respondents. And why this is important, and there were 238 completed results in the comparison group. Those are people who do not have a direct connection to the school district. And we feel that many times as we've run a survey like this, that comparison group tends to be more reflective maybe of how the entire community feels. But one thing we did notice as we evaluated the data from this survey is that the responses between the first group and the comparison group were very much in line. They were very close to being aligned with each other. So we began the survey, what is your age? Again, very typical demographic data that we look for when we do a survey like this. How long have you lived in the school district? Which elementary school do you live closest to? The responses to that question, I'll just point this out because that was one of the things that regarding demographic data that stood out. They were skewed somewhat toward Hanson, Southdale, and Cedar Heights elementary schools. Noticeably fewer responses from North Cedar. We asked the question, do you have school-age children, preschool-age children? How are you connected to the school district? You'll see the responses there in question 4. If you have children who attended a Cedar Falls Community School District school but do not now, what was the last year one of those children attended? If you have school-age children, which schools do your children attend? Then we get into, I think, more of the meat of the survey. which provided more open-ended questions about needs. How would you describe the Cedar Falls Community School District to someone who is not familiar with it? Again, this is an open-ended question. Many of the people who responded referred to the school district's quality programs, excellent staff, and strong reputation. Respondents also in large numbers expressed concerns about the facilities and overcrowding at the high school and to a lesser extent the junior high buildings. In general, community members appear to understand the need to address the issues at the high school. That's what we were able to ascertain from question number 7. Number 8, what can be improved in the Cedar Falls Community School District? Again, the facilities, the high school, that was brought up by a lot of people who took the survey. They referred to the current building as old, outdated, and potentially unsafe for students. They also spoke to grading systems, teacher pay, and equity as areas of potential improvement for the district overall. How satisfied are you with the Cedar Falls Community School District? This is question number 9 in the survey. And again, what we found very interesting here is if you take a look at the first column juxtaposed to the comparison group, you'll find that it's very much in line with each other in terms of how many people who took the survey are either very satisfied or satisfied with the school district. Where do you get most of your information about the schools in the district? This is just to give us a sense of, as you look at strategic communications, are there any mediums here that would surprise us? And there weren't. There really weren't as you went through this, how survey members, stakeholders receive information by and large from district newsletters, emails from the school building, other local media.
Is it okay to go back one
Sure.
slide? Mm-hmm. Just down at the bottom, it talks about the 86% of respondents that said they were satisfied or very satisfied. When you look at other districts across the Midwest, how does that compare? I know it sounds like, with your company, the Donovan Group, doing multiple surveys. I know when we've done surveys in the past, it seems like typically that's kind of a venue for those that are most displeased with the district or maybe unhappy with the situation. And I've seen this with city surveys, sometimes county surveys. It seems like that's kind of a venue that can be used for venting or frustration.
Right.
That seems good, 86%.
I would say that's very good. And it, relatively speaking, as we compare it to the other surveys that we've done over the course of the decade, as I've discussed this with my colleagues, 86% is, I'm not going to say it's a gold standard, Dr. Petit, but I would say it ranks up there in terms of what it is you're looking for and the results that you received. Question 12, can we skip to that, Janelle? I believe that the high school facility needs must be addressed now. Again, there was a strong consensus among respondents that the needs of the high school should be addressed now, and it's worth noting that while this support was a little less strong with that comparison group, nearly 80% in that comparison group still indicated they believe the needs should be addressed now. The next question, I would vote yes on a bond or a referendum question if I felt it were the correct solution and had a tax impact of less than $11 per month on a $100,000 assessed home. These results indicate that nearly 84% of respondents would support a bond issue that would address the high school's facility needs. That comparison group, again, less enthusiastic, which we're not surprised by, still indicated considerable support for it. Also, and I'll note this one more time, this is not a scientific sample. Therefore, the results of the survey would not necessarily align with support for a future bond vote. Are you likely to vote in a school bond referendum? Dr. Petit, you'd mentioned other surveys that we've done. This falls very much in line with what we've done in the past, that you can see here that an overwhelming majority said they would likely vote in a school bond referendum. We've found that those who take the time to fill out a survey like this, those are really those community members who are engaged and turn out to the polls. We also gave folks space to be able to share any additional information that they would like to regarding solutions to the district's facility needs. So again, another open-ended question here. And the feedback that we received on this really focused on the need for a new high school facility and support for or opposition to the district's current plans at the site. Some residents expressed concern about spending and property tax impact along with other issues. Others said they agreed that a new school was needed, but that they were not convinced the current targeted site was the right option. And really that's, at the end of the day, we know that from this survey, we were able to ascertain that folks are engaged, they understand the needs, they understand the need for a new facility, but there were basically 3 or 4 key takeaways, and these are not surprises. Questions about cost, location, reuse, and that's what we were able to take away from the survey. One more thing that I want to point out about this, which was, I would say, a bit unusual, but also goes to the level of engagement with this community. At the end of the survey, we, as we do with other surveys, we allowed folks to be able to leave their name for the school district, if they wanted to contact the survey participant to follow up on questions about facility needs, other things, and or get tours of the high school. So we've done this with other surveys over the years with the Donovan Group, and we have never seen the number of people fill out their name and ask for contact and feedback and a chance to maybe get a tour of the facility. More than 200 people did so with this survey. We find that to be extraordinary. That is a very high number of folks who, as we feel, are engaged, but at the same time want more information. And we think that that's a good thing. With that, that's kind of the synopsis of the survey. If you have any questions, please let me know.
So we push this out in a lot of different ways to try to get feedback. We even, with our newsletter, goes out to thousands and thousands of community members, some of our business and community leaders. We sent this out to different senior resident groups across our community as well, because we wanted that feedback, we wanted that input. And I think Mr. Gallagher summed it up really well. That comparison group gives us good insight as far as people being able to see that might not have any connection to the school system, where those the knowledge base lies, as well as their understanding of some of the issues, challenges, and needs that we face as a community.
How are we reaching out to the 200 that allowed us to have their names?
So I'm following up and sending an email or a phone call if they left their phone number to contact them to see what specific questions they had, and then how we can help with what those either concerns were, if they had other things they wanted to visit about. So yeah, we'll be doing that in the following week.
Good, okay, thank you. Any questions?
As everybody knows, sometimes the question that you ask is the answer that you are given. And I know Mr. Gallagher and his group did a wonderful job to be able to wordsmith those questions to make sure that they were balanced, to make sure we got the feedback that was truly unbiased, to make sure that we were asking questions that were looking and soliciting input as we go through this process. And again, we can't thank them enough to put this together.
Any questions or comments?
So based on the survey results, I mean, this, to undertake something like this is a big community investment. I mean, it hits people right at home.
Sure.
But based on what you see in this survey and with working with the Donovan Group, is there something that we should be doing different?
I would say you continue with your plan of strategic communication to be able to inform and be as transparent as possible about the process. I mean, that was a takeaway, that it is obvious from our vantage point the level of information that people already have at their fingertips about the needs in this community, that they have had questions answered. They're not in the dark about what's going on. And so my advice would be to continue with what you're doing, that process of information seems to be resonating, or else I don't think that you would have had the level of turnout that you did with the survey.
And the survey at the end linked everybody back to the district website to go to the high school information page to be able to go through the different components, the FAQ, which the board has seen through different presentations, which I think was very beneficial. And the links that we had back to that web page were really high level. So people, as they were going through the survey, would go back to that high school page to be able to gain information, to be able to look for answers and continue through the survey. And we thought that was great that people are taking the time to be able to use that as a resource, to be able to gain factual information.
If I could interject, we work with a number of school districts as a company, and the FAQ site that this district has created is the most robust one that we've seen. It's excellent.
Thank you, Janelle.
Thank you. Good questions. We'll continue. Thank you. Okay, moving on now to the superintendent's report.
Yeah, the first thing that's not on the superintendent's report, I would just want to make aware and let our board and our community know that the family of Amy Denholm is certainly in our thoughts. They are certainly with us in our hearts, and Amy was and is a high school counselor and passed away this weekend. She was on a leave, but certainly it's something that we recognize and certainly we'll do everything we can to continue to wrap supports around her family. March 11th is our next board meeting. That will be our preliminary budget. We will go through the budgetary process. Danelle will walk us through some of the different budget components and different aspects. We believe the preliminary budget shows that we will have a tax rate decrease, as we've talked about, and excited about that. I don't want to steal Danelle's thunder by any means, but as we set those parameters, we know that there are some of those aspects that are out of our control and some of those aspects that are within our control, but just as the city did earlier, and matches some of our tax rates equally across the state, we're excited by that trend line. Quick learning conversation, and there was a link that I included with a board update that went back to an article regarding a few pages within a book by Dr. Nair. If you recall, we utilized Fielding Nair for a small amount of time that walked us through some planning and helped set elementary's footprint, or Aldrich Elementary's footprint. I thought this was an interesting article, and I just wanted to bring it to the attention of the board, at least those few pages that were there. And it really highlighted, and I must confess my copy is right behind me, so I'm going to just circle around and grab it. So I apologize about that. I set that back there when we came earlier. And I thought it was intriguing that it really started to talk, and the title of the book is called Blueprint for Tomorrow, Redesigning Schools for Student-Centered Learning. And this is something that we know is vitally important as we look at how do we build out a building that is useful, productive, and focused as our core mission, student learning. So I think what's interesting, it goes into 6 educational strategies that design principals should support as you look at designing buildings and structures, something we did with Aldrich Elementary, as we did with Orchard Hill and North Cedar. But first it talked about student-centered learning, and what does that mean to ensure that we have a versatile space and a welcoming space, spaces that allow for multiple learning settings, small group, large group, sometimes individual areas, to make sure that we are maximizing on engaging students with their mind, with their hands, with their level of creativity, so we can enhance across all learning spectrums. And I really thought they did a nice job kind of explaining that. They talked about teacher collaboration has to be at the center and a centerpiece of any kind of a new structure. Our high school doesn't allow for that, we know that, but when you walk through Aldrich with our PLC spaces and our collaborative spaces, the spaces where we have that engagement for our collaborative teams, our teacher-led teams that are collaborating together for student learning. And this little section of the chapter really talked about how do you enhance that and really move that to the forefront. Talked about positive school culture. And I love this quote in here, and I thought it was really interesting that it says, the school building design can be a very significant and sometimes often overlooked force in creating a positive school climate. And we've talked a lot about that here. As you look at design, students at some of our remodeled buildings come to school because they're there in the morning to be engaged. They're there because they're going to be around students, because it's an inviting space that draws them in. And we've talked to a lot of our students, and I know Marika had to leave, but it would be great to ask Marika this question as well, and we've asked it here at the board table. Our students have told us why they come to the high school early in the morning is for one reason, and that is parking. So they don't have to park 5, 6 blocks away because it's not that space that's inviting, engaging, that says, I'm going to be there because that's a welcoming place to be. The facility's not that way. They would rather meet sometimes down at Papa Joe or some other location to be able to meet and collaborate in the morning because our high schools does not provide that school climate as far as the facade and the way that the building is built. Our staff does to a high level, facility does not. I really like the fact that they talked about the technology integration. We've talked about this frequently. With the 13 additions at the current high school, there are spots where you cannot, period, get cell phone reception, period. There's no way to have that interconnectedness that we think is important. Now, some people will argue you shouldn't have cell phones, period, and again, there's the time and a place for them, but we also understand that with that connectivity becomes that connection to the outside world, and without cell phone connectivity, sometimes it even means internet connectivity and lack of ability to use technology in a way that enhances and supports learning. And I think this section really does a nice job about talking about that and how important it is. The two other components that they talked about was flexible scheduling, which I don't need to go into, but spaces that configure for various groups and learning styles. Then finally, that connection to the environment, community, and global network. And I think we have talked quite a bit about that how do you connect to the environment better? Our current high school does not do that. Aldrich and other spaces across our district do that really, really well. Talks about connection to the community. That's one of the drivers of why we're doing this. We want more community input, support, and involvement, accessibility into some spaces. We know that security is always a big issue, and we don't have that at our current space, so we can't really have that invitation for our community to come in. But with a new building, we can, and have those collective commons, those collaborative commons that I think are so important. And then finally, that connection to the global network, I think, is something that he describes extremely well, excuse me. And finally, I thought this was interesting. I think this goes back to a previous comment earlier this evening. On page 17, it talks about the question of money. And it talks about, and this is a quote, 21st century schools are almost always less expensive to build and operate than a traditional school. And there are a number of reasons, and I won't go into all of them. But I think this is a question that when people think about remodeling, and we had a slide that was presented earlier at a board meeting, and I wish I could pull it up, that talks about, and I know the board knows what I'm saying, the current square footage of the current building, square footage of what a new building would be, and then square footage of a remodeled building would be to meet the needs of what we know is important for students now and into the future. The remodeled, added onto building far exceeds the square footage of a new building. And it goes back to, it's hard to renovate, A, and to be able to have access to natural light, but B, buildings of the past were built on kind of that industrial age model. So there was really a lack of inefficiency with hallways being unusable for learning spaces, with spaces that just weren't efficient for adaptability for students to be able to find places to work together and collaborate. When we look at new design, it's much more efficient. I think at Aldrich, we said traditionally in elementary, we'd have about 14 to 16% of space, a traditional model, that was non-learning spaces. But now with that design, it goes down to about 4 or 5%. We know a high school in a new building will be much more efficient in using more square footage for learning spaces than what our current high school ever can do, and that is the efficiency aspect. And I think he does a nice job describing that and talking about that. So that was a long-winded, I guess, question, but as you read through that, was there anything within these 4 to 5 pages that were intriguing or that caused you to question, pause, or say, aha?
Questions?
I think there was a reference to Xerox and a couple other corporations regarding collaborative working space. And I know in the office that I work in at John Deere, we have many more collaborative team tables that have popped up because that's our focus now. That is how can we bring in groups to work together on the project or the problem or whatever. And so that is, it was interesting that they mentioned, Xerox caught my mind, but there were a couple other ones in there that had changed over some of those spaces.
It's amazing. In our community, we've gone out, and Mr. Connery, I can talk about this, as we started the dialogue about CAPS. I'm not sure we were in a industry, a business that did not have large, open, collaborative spaces of some form or function. Those are the skill sets we have to have our kids prepared for, to be able to engage, collaborate, to be able to have critical thinking collectively, because we all know that the group is much wiser than the individual or the singular person. I think this is amazing when we look at the current high school and the current structure. We don't have collaborative spaces. The best space that we could say might be a collaborative space that kids can go to and meet in is in the cafeteria. And we know that that space, when we have either high temperatures or humidity, turns into a skating rink. And again, we have said, don't put this out, don't put it on Facebook, but kids sliding down hallways, sliding in that area because the condensation and the underground systems are just so old and so antiquated and outdated that it's just not a place or a safe place to be. Plus, that's an area that has no windows. Kids don't want to go there. It's not an inviting area because it's not someplace we would want to be when we look at how do we collaborate, how do we meet together, and how do we collectively enhance our groupthink capability in that environment.
When I taught high school in Florida, I was in a magnet program within a high school, public high school, that was designed in this way, where it was a big open space with some closed off rooms that had windows, and the teachers were able to serve as facilitators. And we were able to really work independently with students. Students would be in various groups doing work, working on fish tanks or projects together or readings, and you were able to attend to the needs of individual students at any given time. It helps students to learn responsibility and, like you said, the collaboration. So, you know, I've personally experienced the benefits of teaching in a space like this, and it's just light years ahead of the desks in a row format that we're so used to in traditional schools.
Facilitator, I think, is a great word because, again, we want students to take ownership of their learning. Obviously, there are those skills that all kids need to have. There is a place for direct instruction, and we know that that's something that has to be done. But there's also ways to enhance the educational experience for students with those unique opportunities based on their areas of focus and passion, but also their learning styles, and they can take some of those project approaches to be able to have and meet the essential standards that we put out there, but to be able to do that in ways that meet their needs. And I think that's vitally important as we look to the future.
Any other comments? Thank you for sharing this with us. We appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. And then I had a short presentation to be able to provide as well. This is just a levy rate update and presentation, potential costing and high school funding, GO bond sale. So next slide. We have always, and this is something that as I reflected back on, kind of paused and said, you know, we always talk about the future and talk about what our future growth is. And again, we know we're going to grow into the future. We know that we have growing elementary class sizes that transition into middle, junior high, and high school, and that is great trend lines. We always don't do a great job looking backwards. So this is the past 10 years, the 2006, and this is the old one, 2006 to 2007, that's a typo on top, to 2016, 2017, a 10-year window. Cedar Falls grew by 19.94% as a student enrollment, certified enrollment. So, you know, sometimes when I go out and present, I'll hear, well, yeah, your projected enrollments look great, but geez, that just doesn't sound realistic. Looking backwards, actually our past enrollment has been greater than what our projected future enrollment is, and we are the 18th largest increase by percentage-wise in the state of Iowa. When you solely look at student increase, we actually move up the bar because again, some of these districts could be a district of 500 students, but they've grown by 500 students in that 10-year span, so they're up there at that 100% growth. But they grew 500 students. In this time frame, I think we grew like 980 students. So it's kind of comparative, but when you look at total number of students, we're higher, but this just gives you a percentage increase because we've done that quite a bit as we look to the future. So I just want to give that perspective. Next slide. I think this is important to note as well. 18-19 of the 25 largest Iowa school districts, total property tax rate, we're the third lowest. You look at the average, we are well below average. We also know that Iowa City just recently passed a bond. We know that there's some work that is being discussed in Dubuque, in Cedar Rapids, and Sioux City. So we know the average will continue to trend up. We're excited that we believe our property tax levy rate will go down. The city's gone down. I think the city is fourth lowest. I think what I heard was in the state. Again, we maximize our dollars here very, very low. There's times that we hear, well, you know, we have really high property tax levy rates. We are very moderate when we look at the large districts across the state, large cities across the state, and certainly well below the average. Next slide. This is part of our FAQs that Mr. Gallagher talked about earlier, and one of the questions that I think is important to note is bonds passed in other districts recently. And the question is, have other districts in Iowa passed a bond for new buildings recently? So it's important to note Iowa City passed a bond in September 12th, 2017 for $191 million, a little over $191 million. Waukee just passed a bond, and this is for a second high school in Waukee, solely for the purpose, again, of building a high school. $117 million, February 6, 2018. And then finally, Ames, and I believe their high school was a few years newer than our high school, but April 3rd, 2018, to replace that high school in Ames, they passed a bond for $110 million to be able to build that and replace that high school, understanding what the needs were as they look at their current facilities, looking forward to what that can provide with those facilities. So we know that a new high school, when we look at these comparisons recently, as well as now we can break down better the square footage components. What we are doing is trying to, again, be very conservative with what we would ask taxpayers for. So the next slide shows, based on a new high school that we know in other districts would cost $110, $117 million, and the construction total cost, project cost here, would be in that probably $8 to $110 million range. We would go and look at a $69 million bond because we would use our 1-cent sales tax revenue effectively, as we've talked about as a school district. Here's what I would be excited about, and we do this and try to plan conservatively. This is rung out true with Aldrich Elementary. We said the tax rate would be at a certain millage rate and then would trend down. We know the same thing would be true with a high school bond levy rate. And that's what's exciting as you look at over a 20-year bond with an annual assessed value increase. Our city's growing. We grew by over $100 million of assessed valuation just this past fiscal year. And again, that's a testament to our city leaders. You will see our previous 10-year assessment value increase was 3.92. The 5-year value increase was 2.91. So we would take the basically 3% because that's a more conservative. And you can see how that trends down over time. So that would be the lime green line. It would go from about a $2.35 down to about $1.40. The next slide kind of breaks it down, I think, a little bit differently, a little bit uniquely. As most districts do, we use a $100,000 assessed home as kind of the benchmark. That way people can do the math. If their assessed home is $200,000, $300,000, quickly and easily do the math. We know 2 years ago, the average assessed home in Cedar Falls was about $160,000. We're now trying to collect that data right now. We assume that's gone up over the last 2 years for the assessed average across Cedar Falls. But you can see here the anticipated cost of a high school bond of $69.9 million for a monthly average for a $100,000 home would be about $10.77. That would be almost cut in half as you look at 20 years, because we would have our assessment grow, our community grow. I think Aldrich Elementary is a classic example. If you build it, people will come, they will develop around it. We know that would occur around a new high school site as well, so we think this is a conservative nature and guess based on how that could build out. But we're excited to say that trend line would go down and the cost would go down as we continue to have growth in our community. One thing that I think is interesting to note, there is one little blip in there in year 8 where it slightly increases, and that is some callable years, some callback years when a bond for the GO bond for the elementary work is callable. So we would anticipate, just because of reworking some of the way that our GO bonds could be, we wanted to be transparent and open, that there could be a slight uptick for 1 year, just as we look at those bonds, but again, then they significantly continue to trend downward. Next slide is more about questions, thoughts, and ideas.
Questions for Dr. Pattee? Good information. This will be on our website. I know we've talked about having a calculator up and running.
We do.
It's okay. All right. Any other questions? Yes, Jeff.
We haven't talked about if there's any parents watching. There was no school today, obviously. I guess just when do you think school? What's our last day of school at this point? How many more increment weather days are we going to have?
Into your
and as families are trying to plan their vacations for the summer and summer activity, what do you suggest?
And also, Andy, I'd like you to point out how much control over rescheduling days or having alternative learning options we have as a district versus what is dictated to us by the state and the DE.
So those are really big questions. This has been the worst winter that I've had as a school administrator, and this is my 18th year as a school administrator. With a polar vortex to blizzard-like conditions to freezing rain all the way across the board, it's just been so unique. I don't know how many more we'll have. We're looking at different options. We hope to be able to communicate some different options soon. I think we're committed as a district not to go with students past June 7th. I think that's important to note. That is something that we want to be able to commit to be able to move forward. But if we have 8 more days of a polar vortex moves in from the Arctic, and we might not be able to meet that. That's an extreme case. I hope we can. The state has really limited some aspects of what we can and can't do. We are on our calendar, so I think one of the options for us is we can extend the school day, and I think that's something that we want to continue to explore and have dialogue about. Some districts do that sometimes without always looking at all the unintended consequences, to make sure we look at that holistically and with fluidity, and something that I think we can be ready to make some announcements to be able to recapture some time, hopefully here in the next few days, to be able to look at that in a way that's well thought out. The DE has said in Iowa you cannot have e-learning days that make up for inclement weather days. And they're very, very clear on their guidance, and there are some districts that I have found that don't always adhere to sometimes Iowa code or sometimes guidance or sometimes case law. But again, Cedar Falls, I think we're always very conservative to make sure that we're abiding by, following, and adhering to rules, regulations, and best practice. And that's something that we've had questions about, but the DE, very, very clear, e-learning days in Iowa can't be used for inclement weather days.
And DE is?
Department of Education. Sorry, thank you. Acronyms. So we know that limits us in some aspects, but also something that comes straight from the Department of Education. The Department of Education has also said that they cannot just say we are no longer we are going to exempt districts because of the polar vortex, even though every school across the state closed for a minimum of, I think, 2 days, maybe 3 days. I think we were closed for 4 days during that polar vortex. that has to be a legislative act. And so the DE has said we cannot make that decision. As a school district, we just can't make that decision and say, well, we're not going to just not make up some days or hours. We have a minimum amount that we have to make up. So those are things that we take very seriously. We know the quality in education here in Cedar Falls is second to none due to our just, again, we've said this over and over, just our staff that's the best in the world. So we want to make sure we make and maintain those amounts that we have as state code and hopefully eventually exceed those amounts. This is such a unique year that we're trying to find that balance. We are probably going to do some things that we've never done in the past, just to make sure we recoup some time so students, staff, family can be able to hopefully find some summer.
So good question, Jeff. And you're going to...
Can I ask, we're also mandated by state law to have so many professional development days, so we can't trade those in for makeup days along that line too?
Correct. And our last professional development day is actually passed. So, you know, we have some non-school days, but those are still contractual non-school days that we have because of parent-teacher conferences, other things. Some people have said, well, just swap out spring break days. That becomes, as you look at the proximity and planning, difficult to do, just because of the fact that we have so many staff, so many families, so many individuals across our community that have already dedicated time with family during that break, and we understand that completely. So that's something that's just not feasible. I know we've had a lot of discussion internally, externally, that why don't we have snow days built into our calendar? And I always try to help people understand, we've always added on snow days at the end of the year. Typically, we might have 1 to 3 snow days on a usual year. If you build in a snow day into your calendar, what that does is instead of June 1st being the end of your school year, you build in 1 snow day into your calendar. June 2nd then is the end of your calendar on paper. Let's build in two snow makeup days into our calendar. June 3rd then becomes the end of your school day or school year on your calendar that you set at the beginning of the year. All it does is shift the target and the end date. So we've always said we're not going to build in snow days. We're going to end when we can end, and then dates will be added on to the end, because either way, the end of your school year varies based on those snow days. So it's just trying to look at this holistically. There's so many unintended consequences. You look at potentially adding time to the school day, all the way from leave requests to down to the finite minutia of transportation and where and how do you drop off kids and child care provisions and all those different aspects. And we want to make sure that we're mindful and thoughtful as we go through that process.
And there is still a group that's celebrating our seniors, am I right, do not have to make up these days? Is that, at least at this point, not by board policy or state law, correct?
Correct. Per code, they have to have a graduation date, end date within 5 days of your set calendar, and those dates aren't made up once that is set.
So they're not in danger of having to go back to school after the graduation date?
We have to state that, yes, they are not.
But just to clarify, I mean, I know one of the concerns, even if we get through winter, is there could be flooding and things like that. So, you know, I think it's important for our parents to remember, if you have a student in your, you know, in your neighborhood it's fine, or the roads were fine, or you have an elementary student and your bus can run, there are so many other issues that go into it. Sometimes our buses don't run when it's so cold. We have a lot of teenage drivers, I have one now, that you have to consider if it's safe for hundreds of our kids to be out on the road driving. So it's easy to be concerned or frustrated with snow days if you're just considering your situation, but there are so many other considerations you are taking into account, as well as working with other school districts and our city staff to make sure that we are, you know, holding school when possible, but not having school when it's a serious concern for our student safety and staff who live out of town.
That is so important to denote. You know, this morning I followed a plow at about 4:45, breaking open Highway 57 west of town. And if you were not out and didn't understand how clogged some of those roads are, it's really sometimes challenging when you look out your door in town to say, oh, it's really not that bad. As we look at holistically serving all of our kids and our region and how can kids traverse to and from, not only on our school buses or within their own private cars and vehicles, we try to make a very mindful approach. And that's hard. and a lot of agreement and disagreements of whether calls are made in the right way or the wrong way, but we always make it on the basis of safety.
Well, we appreciate that you are the one making those calls, just so that the community knows. And we do appreciate that you're up at 4:45 in the morning driving those roads. And we want you to be safe too. So thank you for communicating that with us tonight. And I know that you'll continue to communicate with our parents and just the citizens of Cedar Falls what is happening with our calendar. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right.
2 more things on my list.
Is this for questions or comments?
Yes.
Okay.
Is that what we're in still?
No, we weren't, but we will be.
Oh, I thought we were.
Okay, we are.
Okay, we are? Okay. That's good. For us, I know we've had, because of the cancellations, we need to reschedule some PTA and some Board of Ed visits. That was on my list. I'm sure that will be taken care of. And then, just to give a shout out to Pete Junior High and to Holmes Junior High, is that they're having their cabaret and variety shows this Friday and Saturday. I'm sure tickets are still available. These are, you need these tickets, folks. So, contact the schools.
It's so much fun.
Yeah.
It's fun. Thank you, Susie. Any other questions or comments to come before the board? All right. Do I have a motion?
I move that the Cedar Falls Board of Education enter into closed session to evaluate the professional competency of an individual whose appointment, hiring, performance, or discharge is being considered when necessary to prevent needless and irreparable injury to that individual's reputation, and that individual requests a closed session per Iowa Code.
Thank you, Jeff. Do I have a second?
Second.
It's been seconded by Susie. It will be a roll call vote.
Yep. Ms. Coyle?
Yes.
Mr. Giddens?
Yes.
Mr. Hassman?
Yes.
Ms. Hines?
Yes.
Ms. Leeper?
Yes.
Mr. Orvis?
Yes.
Ms. Walpert?
Yes.
We are now moving into closed session.
Yep, and I would just inform the audience and members of our community that there is no action items after the closed session. We will adjourn and end the meeting at that time.